Hello and welcome everyone. I have yet another different kind of video for you this week. So I've had a cold the last few days, made it so I was unable to finish the clay sculpture that I had planned for this week's video. I'll have to finish it over the next few days and get that to you all next week. But I thought this would still be a pretty good opportunity to share something else that I really like to do, and that is photobashing. So really quick, if you don't know what photobashing is, it's kind of just what it sounds like. You take a bunch of photographs and you bash them together to essentially create a new image. It's a great technique that's typically only used in things like concept art or for general ideation. It's unlikely that you're going to use something like this to create a piece of art that you'd hang on your wall. In fact, a lot of this kind of art basically never sees the light of day. It's kind of just for the artists themselves or the production team. The most common type of photobashing that you'll see actually used in a production setting is matte painting, which is basically the same thing, but much more polished. Well, now that all that's out of the way, let's get into what I'm doing here. You can see I'm just dropping in a bunch of images that I've pulled from Google. Nothing too special, just stuff that kind of fits my theme here. And basically what I'm doing is erasing the backgrounds and all the parts of the images that I don't want to use. I'm also color correcting them so that they all fit together, that way they look more coherent. At this point, I have my general composition and theme figured out, so it's really just about cleaning up the photos, painting over them, and making everything look much more coherent and like it belongs together. So really this is the fun part. I really wanted something ominous in the sky. And you'd be hard-pressed to find something more ominous than a giant black hole. So naturally, I went with the black hole from the movie Interstellar. And while I was painting over it here, I realized it just looks a little too much like a screenshot from Interstellar. So you'll see that I actually erased some of it and kind of changed it a little bit so it didn't read as immediately from Interstellar. A keen eye will probably still catch that though. You see I'm just playing with all the Procreate brushes, trying to figure out which ones I like and what's going to be useful to me. As I'm placing these photos, and especially before I go into painting them, I blur them. And I do this that way the entire image isn't highly detailed, because photographs are high fidelity. They have a lot of texture and visual noise, so if I didn't do this, then the entire image would be fighting for your attention. And that's just not how a good painting works. So I like to blur the photos and then paint back in those details myself. And this allows me to better control where the details and focal points are, which will help me guide your eye across the image the way that I'd like. For me, when I do these, I do like to make them look a little bit more painterly. I want you to second guess yourself where, is that a photobash, or is that a photo, or is it a painting? So I like to kind of dance on that line. What I'm doing with this building on the right is a good example of what I'm talking about. I'm actually painting out a lot of the textures that I don't need, because a lot of the detail just doesn't really matter, and I don't need it. It's just going to distract from the rest of the image. I also skew it a bit more so it matches the perspective better, and I blur it just a little bit more towards the end here. And later I'll come back and paint more detail on top myself. You'll notice parts of the image is flashing and kind of turning off and on. That's just me playing with different blending modes and also seeing what image is on what layer, because this kind of stuff quickly devolves into a mess of dozens of layers, so it can be kind of hard to keep track of. Also, this was all captured within Procreate, so it's harder for me to show the complete process of selecting blending modes and playing with layers and stuff like that, because it doesn't capture all the UI functions. But moving forward, I will be doing this in Photoshop, where I can show you all more step-by-step of the process, if that's interesting to you. It was actually the first thing I used Procreate for. I figured it'd be a great way to learn the ins and the outs of the software. It took me about 3 hours to make, which honestly a lot of was probably fiddling around with the menus more than anything, kind of learning where everything is. And I'm also using all the default tools and brushes. This is vanilla Procreate. So now I'm really bringing in that bright orange and yellow light onto the objects in the lower part of the image. I really wanted that warm and cool contrast throughout this piece. I really like blues and purples with reds and oranges anyways, so that was one of my goals going in here. And now it's really just about bringing out all the other details that kind of got lost in playing with blending modes and erasing and everything. Like these trees on the right, they're set to multiply to hide some of the background that I couldn't erase. And it's time to paint them back in and bring them back into the foreground. This building on the left was actually an ideal image to start with because it had very uniform lighting, which meant that I could paint in the shadows and the highlights much easier. And so that's what I'm doing right now, really. Just painting in the shadows to match the rest of the image, getting the lighting to match on the building, throwing in some highlights. It's a lot of what photobashing is. You're just making sure everything fits together and is reacting to one another properly within the scene, which you do in a normal painting anyways, but there's just a little added layer of thinking things through when it's a photobash. So we've pretty much approached the final 10% or so of this painting, just throwing in the darkest darks and the lightest lights, making sure everything is grounded and has shadows and is reacting to the lighting in the scene properly. Again, I know I'm repeating myself a lot here, but it's very important with this kind of work to make sure everything looks like it fits together. Otherwise, you kind of just end up with a collage of photos. And photobashing, when it's done bad, can look much worse than just a bad regular painting, to be honest with you. So this is a really important step. The last 10% is already very important with the painting anyways, but you really should do a couple final passes with something like this, just to see if you've missed anything. Finally, it's time to drop in our mandatory lone wanderer character. I wanted a military figure, and I really like this image, but I don't want him to just look like a US soldier. So, gonna heavily paint over him, kind of change his silhouette a little bit, but ultimately the silhouette is all I'm interested in. So my plan, much like with everything else, is to paint out a lot of the detail, just hang on to the silhouette, and use a lot of loose brush strokes to imply a different kind of gear, just so it looks a little bit different than what the base image started as. Now he's obviously the primary focal point of the image. Secondary would be the big black hole in the sky. So I want him to immediately draw your attention with a bit more detail and clarity than the environment that surrounds him, but I still want to maintain that painterly look that I've been talking about this whole time. So I'm going to achieve that again with very loose brush strokes and kind of rely on implying detail as opposed to painting every single thing about him in. I'm also going to top him off with a very saturated rim light to help him stand out among his environment, and to also, again, just reiterate that this is a painting and not just a photograph. And that really covers this whole process. All that's left is to add a guardrail in the street, add some deeper dark shadows, some ambient occlusion, some pure white hot spots to kind of break up the silhouettes a little bit more, which I may have gone a little heavy-handed with on this one. Get all of my layers sorted out and merged together so I can apply my final color pass on it to make sure everything is color corrected properly. And then just some final touches like atmospheric perspective, just to push everything back and again make everything really sit uniformly in the scene. And I actually finished this one off with a vignette to really add a little bit of tunnel claustrophobia vision to it. Really help sell that focal point and that really hot, warm sky and the cool foreground. I really hope you guys enjoyed this kind of stuff. You can probably tell I'm interested in just kind of doing all things art, especially with painting. So I'd love to get some more weekly videos like this going alongside the sculpting videos. I have a lot of plans for painting videos and concept art videos like this, and a few other themed videos that I think will be really fun to do that I'm currently working on. So please be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and if you did, leave a comment. Let me know if you'd like more stuff like this and anything else you'd like to see that may be similar to this kind of work. Don't forget to visit ascentintomadness.com to find me on all of my socials, and I will see you all next week. Hopefully I'm not sick too much longer. That would suck.